everybody. Welcome back to the Evermore podcast, home of the Newcastle United podcast on the Evermore YouTube channel. I'm your host, Chris, and we're back with another special. As you can see, I've been joined by a special guest. We're looking at the Magpies in the media and just how basically the press perception has changed of Newcastle United. And I'm delighted to say I've been joined by a good mate of ours, Jacque Talbot. How are you doing, Jack? You okay?
Oh, good. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, all good.
Yes, fantastic. It's good to have you on, mate. And I'm going to be very keen to hear your opinions on some of the topics we're going to cover in a minute. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we get stuck in. If you haven't already, please click the like and subscribe button. We'd love you to do that. And we're on about 1830 subs, I think, now. So we're really close to 1900, which is a massive milestone for us, especially how young the channel is. So thanks to all the support everyone's given us. And keep clicking the button. Loads of free content like this and the 2 live shows that we do weekly as well. So we'll get stuck straight in then, Jacque. So just, I suppose, from our perspective, we're keen to talk to yourself, obviously somebody in the media, somebody who's reporting on Newcastle United. From a professional point of view, I suppose from a professional and a personal point of view as a Newcastle fan as well, how do you feel the new look Newcastle United is coming across, in the press with yourself and your colleagues?
With regard to in terms of the ownership and stuff, I think generally in terms of sporting enterprise, I think that there is a general positivity around it. You look at George Corkin, it's all very positive. I think the Chronicle, they must be enjoying themselves. These are reporters who've been on the beat as well for up to a decade and probably have only enjoyed the last year of it because they've had to deal with the Mike Ashley reign. So I think it seems to be, quite a happy place at the moment. In terms of how the club is perceived in the media, there's no getting away from the ownership and stuff, and shining a light on that, which I do think is important if it's done right. And I've been looking a lot about the upcoming World Cup and stuff, and the things that have gone on there with the migrant workers and how they've treated them and their accommodation stuff. It's atrocious, and that's why you need journalism. You do need to have a light on these things. But I suppose what irks me is the when it gets to sort of Twitter point scoring, I suppose, and you're making jokes about bone sores and stuff, and it's like, well, you're just trivializing it. You're not actually adding to it. It's just done for the sake of virtue signaling, and you're doing yourself and the whole issue no favors at all. So everything is, unfortunately, Newcastle's achievements, whether they win the FA Cup for the first time since 1954, I think, it will always be through the filter of the ownership as well, and that is frustrating, somewhat needed, but I say, sorry, just I'm rambling, but yeah, just in terms of the general sporting enterprise and stuff, it seems to be quite good, I believe, and positive, which is a welcome change.
Yeah, no, I think, to be fair, it isn't a ramble, mate. I think you're totally right. It's this was a consequence of these owners coming in, really, wasn't it? As much as everybody saw the X amount of 100 billion on the ticket and everything else, that I don't think any Newcastle fan, and most Newcastle fans anyway, there is some that have gone completely the other way, but most with a common sense and a slight brain cell or two in their skull, realize that these people don't come from a great humanitarian background, and there is a lot of atrocities going on in their country, and I mean, there was no other, I suppose, better topic than that than the whole thing about the shirt, wasn't there? It was almost like 2 tribes went to war internally within the fan base, even over the choice of the shirt. I was a bit more pragmatic. Me and Mark were doing a show, and I actually said, surely somebody in Castore has to look at that and go, that's maybe not a good idea.
Absolutely. I don't know if it was intentional or not. I'm not sure. I generally don't know whether it was.
Possibly. And I suppose that does put question marks on the ownership, doesn't it? If it was an intentional design, if they said, no, we want to look like that, then that's a total different kind of worms you're opening up there altogether, isn't it? Because that's already, even at the early stage of the new look Newcastle, the influence of the owners, and how, that synergy between Saudi Arabia and Newcastle is going to grow and grow and grow. I suppose it's a funny one, because I always point to the Manchester City one. You're right to highlight the World Cup as well. I mean, some of the stuff is absolutely abhorrent. It's atrocious, but come November, a lot of the people who are complaining about it on Twitter will forget all about it when, England are in the knockouts or whatever. But I think you have to remember that. And I think you're right. Journalism plays a huge part in that. mate. It really, really does. And I don't think anybody should shy away from reminding you know the footballing world about the improvements in Newcastle owners have to make. But you're right. I mean, there is some journalists, not to dig anybody out, but there is some of them who just do it for mischief making, isn't it? And to maybe further their profile. Does that frustrate you as well, mate, from a journalistic point of view?
I mean, the worst I saw was someone basically hounding online the one of the volunteers at the Newcastle LGBT group, which is a volunteer group. And I'm like, how can you believe you're on the right side here? And I suppose maybe I'm wrong about this, but I just feel certain topics of conversation there's certain ways to go about things, and just sort of arguing with a non-NUFC people online is probably not the best way to go about challenging such a topic. I mean, it can be frustrating. It can be frustrating because if you believe in these things and you want to legitimize them, I just feel it's doing them no favors. And I'm not going to go into who or whatever, but I remember about a few months back going like the people who were sort of bemoaning Man City very openly and stuff, and I kind of just thought, well, are these people, when they get an interview with, say, Kevin De Bruyne, is that going to be like the focal point of their discussion?
Well, that's happened with Eddie Howe, if you remember, didn't it? Almost one of his first press conferences, somebody asked him about that, didn't they? About Saudi Arabia, I think.
They did, yeah. I mean, it's kind of, but they're in their right to ask it, and he's in his right to be stum about it. But also, there has to be a degree of consistency with that. And if you're just doing it, if you're in a press conference, but if you've got a lovely interview with a superstar who happens to make millions off the same state and you don't ask that question, then it just comes across as insincere. And I find that problematic. It's very hard to navigate, I think, because I support Newcastle. I don't support PFI. And, I'm sure Man City fans don't support Abu Dhabi, and PSG fans don't support Qatar and stuff. You don't support Man United. Certainly don't support the Glazers. You don't support Glazers FC, even though they're in a majority stake. I support my football club. All I care about is football, and I'm very, very deliberate on this. I don't mind, but on Twitter and stuff, I just don't talk about it because it's so. It's no point, because it doesn't do any good at all. It doesn't do any good at all. I just try and it's football. I enjoy football. I enjoy sport. And I'm not proper journalist. I'm not like, Adam Crafton at The Athletic or anything like that. So for me, I just want to keep it frothy and, just enjoy football because that's what I love. So, yeah. But for you, have you had any reservations when the takeover went through, or were you just sort of in the middle as well, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of conflicting, I think. I mean, I'm a Newcastle fan who's been lucky to see the good days. With the age that I am, I remember the good old days, and the John Hall days, and then obviously when Bobby came back and everything else. So I enjoyed a bit of, you don't want to say success because it wasn't success in terms of silverware, but success in terms of prestige, the league position, Champions League, going for titles, those kind of things. But so the new fans, I can understand them throwing all in straight away from the off and just being blindsided by anybody but Ashley kind of mentality. I think as a lot of those fans mature a bit and grow up a bit, I think they will start to realize there's more to that than just the wealth and just the prestige and just the Kieran Trippier over the walls and all that stuff. There's a lot more to it underneath the surface. And I think, being fans of, obviously, your kind of ilk, my kind of ilk, we are a bit conflicted because we want Newcastle to be the best that it possibly can be, and getting rid of Mike Ashley was paramount for that. There's no question about that. That had to happen. I think regardless of whoever came in, I think would have been treated like a savior if they did anything other than what Ashley did. But obviously, given the wealth, I think everyone was really almost taken by, in terms of blinded by the dazzling lights. But as it's transpired, I mean, this kind of takes us on to maybe the next bit as well for the pure football side. As it's transpired, as much as the PIF have all this wealth, that wealth isn't necessarily trickling right down to Newcastle. Yes, we're buying better than we did, with under Ashley, which isn't very hard because he bought like a bag of crisps and a Mars bar for 10 years, didn't he, really, from the kiosk in the Gallagher. But, we are spending on really good players. But, the club have been quite staunch in their wage caps and everything else. I mean, I've kind of on the channel, I've even said that maybe they need to go a little bit higher to to pay the going rate for players. I mean, is that something, you think the media are applauding the club, not the PIF, more Amanda Staveley, probably PCP partners? Are they applauding their tact on that? Or do you think, from your perspective, do you think there's a little bit of naivety there, that maybe they could go a little bit higher and get, maybe, Tillemans and Madison, those kind of players?
Yeah, I mean, if I was, I don't know if you know much about like the Liverpool fans, but they have top reds, and which are the ones who love their owners, and they're the ones who say like, no, we should have bought a centre. And I would probably be a bit of a top red in a Newcastle sense, a top black and white.
I think I'm getting close to that as well. Mate,
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just because you look at expenditure and having them restrictions, I think are great. You just got to look at Everton, look at the state of them as a club. I'm not even going to Everton. Well, I am a bit, but just the whole reign. Look at Man United. It's just
wrong way to do it, isn't it? There's a right way and a wrong way, and it's the wrong way to do it the way they're doing it, isn't it?
Because they know Casemiro's gone there, and he's on ridiculous money as well, because he knows it's. This is just from the outside looking in. Everyone knows, go to Man United, they'll just chuck loads of money at you, and they can just go there and you can do 7 out of 10 performances, and there's that culture. And I think Liverpool were actually quite shrewd with the Salah thing, because they didn't want to break their salary cap, and they tussled a lot with Salah. They probably always were going to give it to him, but they were going to make it no easy feat. So Newcastle will be full of surprises. I think the Isaac move, which was just I think Luke Edwards reported it a month ago, basically shot it down basically the next day, saying they're not going to do this and that. And then they end up getting him for a reduction in salary, a reduction of probably saved themselves maybe £30 million. I don't know, just from waiting and being shrewd. So there's no reason, for Madison or anything like that. Should they break their wage? I think an organic growth would be paramount, and I think that's the way to go. There's nothing that this club have done in the last year or so that has a set alarm bells for me in terms of their spending, the way they've done things. I have total, maybe blind faith in how they're doing things, and but I understand. I think maybe online transfer culture, you want the best players in, and there is that bit of frustration. We should have put a winger in, but maybe after we play our next 2 games and we get 6 points, for instance, maybe that won't be an issue, and it'd be like, oh, it was just a bit, But obviously, maybe there's an opposing view of that. I don't know. Do you feel Madison should have come in maybe along with Isaac?
It does take us into a nicely to the next section probably as well, but which is tales from the transfer window. Yeah, so I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, I think you can't knock the business that the club has done. Certainly, when you look at the previous business, famously go back to that season we finished 5th and we bought Vernon and Anita. We didn't do anything to build on the squad. That was the difference between then and now. So I do get that. I'm not one of those people who throw this time last year in people's faces, because I think everyone has a right to judge where they are right now. But I think looking at the transfers, there's no question that, ironically, we were managed by a really good former centre-half in Steve Bruce, but we were shipping goals like a sieve. So Eddie Howe come in straight away and addressed that. He signed, 3 defenders, 3 very good defenders, and ended up getting a really good goalkeeper in the summer, which was a huge upgrade on Dubravka. But I just felt that, I think, and, we're going to talk about this on the Live Evermore as well this week, but I think that potentially we overestimated the quality of some of the players that are there. Miguel Almiron in particular, Ryan Fraser. They have moments where they can step up and look good for a game or 2 or 3 here or there. But I'm with you, Jack. I think massively missed a trick not getting somebody on that right side at midfield. Maybe another creative influence like a Madison, to come in, or maybe even lighten the load from ASM. Not to overload him with all the creativity burden. And I suppose that was the big one that was doing the rounds. I don't know if you heard any other players that we were linked to. I mean, I was quite disappointed on the deadline day that Newcastle didn't move for Tillemans. I don't know whether we did or not. There was noise about it on Twitter. Was there any truth in that, May, or did we never move for Tillemans, as far as you know?
I think in terms of what clubs can, the players they like. So, a club can like a player and have them on a list, but every club has a very extensive list. Yeah. Tillemans, he said today to Sky Sports he's happier. He loves it at Leicester now, apparently. But he wanted Arsenal, I think, but Arsenal didn't move for him, and I think Arsenal would have had to ship some players off to afford him in the end. But he's, I think he wants European football, and I think especially now because Leicester are sort of as they are at the moment, he's looking elsewhere. I'm surprised Man United didn't go for him. He's certainly a player who wants to move. He's certainly a player that Eddie Howe likes. But there are clubs who I'm sure will have their eye on him as well. Possibly January. I think I was surprised that he didn't go even to Liverpool as well. But all these clubs would be after him because he is a great player. But yeah, there was certainly interest from the Leicester side. I heard that that Newcastle were keen to a degree, but in terms of whether they'd move for him or not, I don't know. Possibly. I'd like to see him, of course. He's he's 25, I think, still, isn't he? 26.
He's a brilliant footballer. I mean, if you put him in that midfield three with Joe Linton and Bruno, for example, I mean, he would just massively improve us, wouldn't he, as a player? There's no doubt about that.
Very complete football player, very complete midfielder, can shoot, can pass, can carry the ball. So yeah, and it sort of depends. I suppose it depends what happens with Leicester. I can't see Brendan Rodgers staying there for quite a while. In fact, by the time this comes out, you may have heard that I think Russell, the Southampton manager's gone as well.
Oh right, wow.
Yeah, you'll hear that probably later today, I think.
That doesn't surprise me. It makes you, because it's funny with these kind of clubs in and around us, your Southamptons. I mean, Leicester was always a team we were looking up to, wasn't it? In terms of they bought well, the scouting was incredible. They'd get these players from nowhere like Kante's and Didi's, guys like that, and Tillemans even, and then they would build them up to be 50-60 million pound players like Mahrez and sell them off and bank the money, and it just seemed like a really good formula. But it all seems to have crumbled down a little bit for Leicester. I mean, I've got a couple of Leicester mates, and I heard that Tillemans had put his house up for sale, that he was living in temporary accommodation. Obviously, not the kind of temporary accommodation that it sounds like. He wasn't in a council flat somewhere in the middle of Leicester. But he was living somewhere where he could just get up and go with his family because he was that confident that he was going to move. But what disappointed me, I think, from the club, and I'm certainly not negative, and I'm not knocking the regime, but and you look at those other managers in and around us, losing their jobs, and thankfully Eddie Howe looks like he's here to stay for the long haul, because previously he would have been linked to those other clubs and we might have lost him, like Brighton, Southampton, and guys like that. So Definitely. It feels good to have that bit of security that the manager's there. But I was a bit disappointed that, for example, you look at Manchester United blowing 100 million on Anthony, whether you think he's good or not. We could have got Maddison and Tillemans for less than that value. And I just felt like the club missed a trick a bit, Jack, on that, mate. I mean, what do you think? Do you think they should have just rolled the dice and said these guys could get us top six if we get these two?
I think the issue probably was the financial fair play, and that's what's been said, isn't it? The fact we spent it all on Tillemans, on Isaac, and I don't know, but maybe they could have forced the issue with an obligation to buy or something like that. And I suppose as well, I think Eddie Howe actually touched on this as well about the negotiations with these clubs who don't want to negotiate with Newcastle, especially someone like Leicester. On a bit of a downward spiral. A club like Newcastle are going to be, competing with them for Europa, if not this season, next season most likely. Are they going to want to start selling their best players to that club, or being, they're going to make it as hard as possible? So, could Newcastle have done more? On the outside looking in, they could have maybe pushed for another player. I mean, one win in 7 isn't great, and I've said that. I know there's been a few things against us and refereeing decisions, but you still should overcome that. In my opinion, you should still be able to overcome that and get them points. The time will tell, I suppose. And there's also January, and but I haven't lost faith. And I mean, it's an interesting point you touched there about criticizing the regime. And for me, I'm very pro regime, but I also feel, I have noticed online a little bit, like any sort of criticism of the owners or of Eddie Howe, I feel like you should be able to do that still. I know they're great and everything, but you should be able to have a little moan. But you seem to get a bit, people can pile on and stuff and be like, "Oh, shut up," But
it's interesting actually. It's something I do feel quite strongly about. We've spoken about this on the channel before. It's almost become quite cult-esque. The new owners are, it's almost like some weird Scientology-esque group that you have to buy into everything that they say, and if you dare question it, you're a non-believer, and or worse, you're a Macam, which is the first thing on Twitter. But you're right. I mean, football's all about the here and now, isn't it? Yes, you can plan for the future, and yes, you can, look back at the days of the past, but generally most football fans, any feelings that they have of either joy or dissatisfaction is the current right now. So if you look at, like you say, one win in 7, yes, the decisions and everything else, you can bemoan that, but every club can bemoan that. West Ham could bemoan it. You know, Fulham have been screwed, Leeds have been screwed. You see all these teams have been screwed by VAR this season already. But when you look at the chances and the teams that we've played and the quality of the players that are there, you know, we should have had more points on the board. I mean, I actually Joe Willock takes a bit of stick. I think he's a very good footballer. We actually did a special on, and I'm not criticizing Howe here. I'll probably get jumped on in the comments, but I think Howe has tried to turn him into a complete midfielder like Tielemans, but I think he's actually better at arriving in the box and scoring goals. And I think that we've almost coached that out of him, so he's less of a threat on the field because of that. Yes, he's good at the build-up and everything, but I'd get your take on that, mate. Just as a sidebar, you know, do you think that maybe Eddie Howe is trying to get some of these players to do things that they just can't do? Do you think that's maybe an issue as well?
Well, Joe Willock, I did see last year. Well, it was the year before that, but yeah, when we had that run at the end of Steve Bruce's, you know, when he did really well, he scored like 7 goals in 8 or something,
8 goals in 7 or something,
something like that. But he's he can tackle a lot. He's very good at tackling. He got something like 4 tackles per 90 or something like that. But as well as him, the Bruno Guimaraes, who's, I think Craig Hope did a story today, or was it yesterday, about how Guimaraes wants to be more advanced and stuff like that. And so I'm not sure what's happening with that midfield. Maybe it just speaks of the fact we do need someone. We're missing John Joe Shelby, probably. Maybe John Joe Shelby's the answer to all our problems, and he just gets everything ticking over, maybe. But yeah, I would like to see Willock come in a bit more, and then Guimaraes wants to do that a bit, and Joe Linton used to be a striker as well, so I'm not sure. But I think he's been quite competent, Joe Willock, and I think he flew under the radar a little bit last year. He seems to have come out a little bit more, I feel, but I know he has his critics. But maybe for me, maybe in the long run, Joe Willock's someone who can come off the bench and carry the ball from midfield, and as you say, be in amongst the box, that kind of thing. Not quite, you know, the front three, but just sort of behind that. So yeah.
He's still incredibly young as well. People forget that, you know, Joe Willock. He's not, you know, he's not like a seasoned veteran. He's not 27 like Grealish or something like that. You know, he's still very young. But I think, you know, you want to get to the stage really, and I suppose this goes back to the January window. Really, we've already mentioned a bit about Maddison, Tielemans. I mean, there's a big player I think that's missing is a number 6 or a holding midfielder that allows Bruno to do that, to stretch his legs and be a number 8. And almost if you get a player of that ilk, and I know we were linked to Alvarez from Ajax, who's a smashing player, a real good number 6. You know, do you think that's a position that the club might look to address as well as the right wing come January? Do you think they're 2 key areas they may be looking at?
Certainly the right wing. The holding midfield depends. I think a lot depends on how much trust Howe has in Shelby. Is it Alvarez with your Ajax? It'd be very hard to get because, I mean, they've sold their best midfielder, best striker, goalkeeper. The manager's gone. They've just sold so many, and I just don't know if they're
decimated, haven't they? Yeah,
they've just I know they're a selling club, but also like that. It's like they've just been stripped of all their assets. They must have like 400 million in the bank after this summer. The Haller transfer, Gravenberch, and then obviously Martinez and Ten Hag. But he'd be great. He'd obviously be really, really good. I'd like to see a holding midfielder come in. I'd like to see a young holding midfielder come in. Perhaps we can have Shelby there, and you can sort of maybe just take over when Shelby's injured or when he gets that, you know, string of yellow cards and he misses a few games, as he inevitably will. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Really, I think I'd like to find out a bit more about what's going to happen in terms of financial fair play in January, whether we'll have a bit more room for manoeuvre. Do you know, does it reset after the year? I should know this really, but I'm just really terrible at things like this.
No, I think it's the financial year, isn't it? I think April. In the financial year resets. I mean, it actually takes us into this the next category quite well. Actually, it's almost seamless, this, Jacque. We're moving on at speed. But yeah, there is obviously fresh meetings planned with the PL, and again, we'll talk about that in a second about the NUFC agenda. But I think on the financial fair play, it's set in the financial year. And it's got to be, obviously, you have to, I think, have more profits than what you're spending effectively is what it is. But what they've done, I think now, is they made the changes to it. So anything you do improvement-wise, and this is why Leicester, I think, are in real trouble. They spent all this money on this sort of state-of-the-art training complex. To try and bring in the youth as well, get scouting, get the right players in, everything else. It's the right thing to do as a football club, no question about that. Especially a club like Leicester, who, you know, have almost punched above their weight for a long time, been up, been down, and then they got to a level where they were consistent, and they thought, right, this is the time to throw money at it, invest it, and get the Harvey Barneses of tomorrow to come in and everything else. But they've been punished for it because, obviously that goes against the P&L because of the money they spent on that. And Newcastle United, I think, have got the same problem with the training ground. And I think this is where this loan came in. I think the loan was either to facilitate the ESAC deal or to pay the training ground because the club don't want to breach FFP. But I think you've got 3 years before you get challenged on it. So it's 3 years worth of financial revenues. And then there's I think there's a total figure at the end of it. I mean, the Swiss Ramble does it amazingly on Twitter. If you can keep up with the things, I get lost about the third one in.
Yeah, you have to. It's one of you have to kind of really read it and dissect and take in every sentence. Yeah, otherwise it's going to come across as foreign language. Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, I think so. The argument, I suppose, for Newcastle really has been, did it go early and take the hit of the big dip of the loss in the first year, potentially finish top 4. And then get the Champions League revenue and everything else, and then the third year, so you almost have an average of actually you're okay, you're there or thereabouts. So it's always that when do you go with it? But I mean, these fresh meetings that are planned, again, this I don't know what your take of this. I think it was in the Times, which I know you write for as well. The kind of outset looking in seems to be it's a noble cause is what it seems to be, but it might be a sinister act wrapped in a noble cause. Whereas they're talking about getting more money down to the lower leagues, to the Championship, to the to the League Ones, League Twos, which is massively needed because we know the distribution of wealth is so grossly unfair. For the lower leagues, it's more heavily weighted to the Premier League. But there seems to be a bit of a power grab yet again by the Premier League elite or the infamous ESL 6, where they're trying to push a narrative, I think, or a piece of legislation that says clubs can't spend on big transfer fees and specifically big agent fees unless they have the revenue to back it up. So that almost cuts out the other, kind of 14 clubs in the division, including Newcastle, doesn't it, mate? Because our revenue isn't there thanks to all the years of Ashley, starving us of commercial partnerships.
Yeah, it's no secret that these sort of clubs are wary of Newcastle. And I think the most obvious point of that was probably the Jesse Lingard deal that Man United did. And with Newcastle, and I think this is unprecedented. I've never heard of this, but the £15 million survival fee for Jesse Lingard, which was just
crazy,
absolute joke. That's like what, and really unfair to Jesse. Whether you think of Jesse Lingard, but it's very unfair to him as well. No wonder he was so frustrated. These big clubs, I suppose I don't know precisely how it works, but if there's presumably 20. You'd imagine, as you say, the larger clubs effectively are stronger components of that and have more of a say, and they're collectivize as well because their interest will be in the same wavelength, really. And but yeah, the meeting, you say, I think it'd be great to distribute more wealth, and I'm a bit of a, obviously I'm loving this Newcastle, but I would like to see the Premier League be a bit more of a level playing field and have bit more financial equality. But with what you said there with regards to the top 6 and how having bigger revenue can give them more leeway, then that's obviously very unfair. I think you mentioned there about sort of an anti-Newcastle agenda. I'm very I've heard of stuff like that before, and I do get it. I'm sure there is some fear around Newcastle and their owners and what they could achieve potentially with the backing. I do wonder, this could be, because I'm a southerner, I do wonder a little bit, because I see it online as well, if the anti, the league's out to get us kind of thing. Do you think it comes geographically from Newcastle being quite far away and away from London and stuff, and you're brought up in a culture where it's just so almost distant to the rest of the South and the Premier League and stuff, that perhaps that attitude comes from that as well, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be some people in amongst the fan base who think of it as a north-south divide, just as they do with economies and politics and everything else as well. But I think we're probably not as totalitarian as the Liverpool fans are, for example, where they actually don't even think they're British. They think Scouse is a completely different nationality to everything else. Yeah. They haven't got their own national anthem yet. But going back to Newcastle, I think it's fueled really Certainly, I think because a lot of sensible, articulate people here are starting to ask these questions that aren't normal. Twitter morons are starting to ask these questions. And I think when you see things, you hear these articles creeping out in the press, and I think they are in the press because people are telling people about these things. It's like these kind of things. If someone's at an exhibition or a conference and they've had a couple of beers and they say, "Oh, well, I'll tell you what, Newcastle aren't doing that because we're going to say this and that," and the journalist just scribbles it down and or sly little record on the phone and off they go. But I do think when you hear things like, Liverpool talking about and Spurs were against the takeover from the start, I believe, before it even went through. They were two clubs that actually argued against it. I think the clubs had a chance to vote for, I believe, commercial revenue deals because the league were worried about, the Saudi Arabians, utilising their massive index of business contacts and blowing everybody out of the water. And I think there was a meeting where everybody voted against that because they were worried that Newcastle were going to steamroll them commercially. The only team that didn't was City for obvious reasons because they're in a similar situation as well. So I do think when you start hearing these things, it does fuel that kind of anti-Newcastle narrative. But I think with regards to this particular one, you hit the nail on the head, mate, about the Salah deal. Liverpool, like everybody else, have to keep their finances in check, regardless of being this massive commercial monster and this historic football club. They've got to pay Jurgen Klopp a massive wage as a coach. He's one of the most sought after coaches in the world. They've got people like Salah, who's arguably the best player on the planet right now. So they've got to do these types of things. And their worst nightmare, surely, isn't it, is for Newcastle United to qualify for Europe, because almost a bit like the Isak deal, that felt like a sliding door moment. If we qualify for Europa this season, for argument's sake, that's another sliding door moment because there's more revenue coming in. And then maybe Newcastle start looking at a bigger fish, bigger players, bigger wages. And that's when I think the likes of Liverpool, Arsenal, Spurs will get worried. And I think that's probably what's driven this, isn't it, mate? I think in these meetings.
I think so, yeah. I mean, they must be looking ahead in the sort of the next 5 years and they want to keep the status quo, in a financial sense as well, because obviously if someone's coming up, someone's got to drop down as well. Yeah. I mean, look at Leicester as well. I know you mentioned it there, who tried to do it by getting the training ground and stuff. And I thought they were going to push up to sort of top 6 level at one point, but it just sort of goes to show how firm that top 6 is. And you look at them now, but obviously with our Saudi owners and stuff, there's more of a chance of it. So I don't know. I mean, the trouble is I don't know how questionable the representatives of the clubs are, whether they're all sort of just wanting to keep the status quo, or whether they generally are concerned about the league and the structure of the league. I don't know, but certainly what's on the agenda at the meeting there doesn't do Newcastle any favours, I wouldn't say.
No, it is quite funny because years ago, the Greedy Six then broke away and started the Premier League in the first place, didn't they? They kind of disbanded the traditional sense of football and they try to do it with ESL. I mean, just before we move on to the last section, I mean, the ESL, that's not gone away, hasn't it, mate? I do think these Greedy Six are still very much got an eye on that. And do you think that'll be revived, or do you think just the kind of global outpouring of detest from football fans has poured cold water on that, mate? Do you think that still rages on in the background?
That still rages on, definitely. I think it's you look at the Serie A, like Juventus especially, and also Real Madrid as well. They want to. It's a different type of model they have. They have especially in La Liga, elected presidents and stuff, and they definitely want to see it, because I think they can see it slipping away. The Premier League really slipping away ahead of the race, and that will continue. And I feel with the expenditure and transfers and stuff, and how it just seems to me that things in 10 years' time, I don't know what will be, if it will be the same at all. And there seems to be this sort of the clubs and representatives just want to meddle. People are just obsessed with meddling and tweaking things now. Yeah, and I know like Super League isn't necessarily associated with that, but I feel that I'm not saying it will come into fruition, but I certainly believe that it's definitely not going away, and it's sort of dependent on what happens in Barcelona as well, I feel, and the Italian leagues and that. I mean, in an ideal world for me, it'll be kind of like 50+1 all over, but it's not an ideal world. It is what it is. So the thing with the Super League as well, and I know it was awful and a terrible exhibitionist idea of sort of Americanizing the sport and zero jeopardy, which is one of the worst aspects of football.
Crazy.
Like Man City, I've said to my Man City mates, because I live in Manchester and I've got a few Man City friends. I'm like, do you actually enjoy winning? Because there's no jeopardy when you play Southampton. There's like none. And like, I just don't know how they can enjoy it, kind of thing. And basically that's but also the European Super League. I mean, they won't allow state-run clubs, I don't think, is one of them. And I do feel I like Newcastle and I love the fact we're spending money, but in principle, don't like the idea of a state-run club either. So there are interesting aspects of the Super League, but sorry, waffled on a bit, yeah. But basically, I don't think it's going away.
Yeah, it's interesting. You touched on something there that really wound me up the other day. We'll just touch about this before we move on. Todd Bowley at Chelsea, the idea of the the Americanized culture of the playoff games and the All-Star games and all that. This really worries me, because as much as I like innovation, I like evolution, and of course everything changes. I think the Premier League sold it so long ago, but there's still sprinklings of traditionalist feelings of what the football clubs are and what they are to the communities and everything else. Very, very faint whiffs of it, but still there in the background. And I worry the more people like Bolly that come in and mouth off like this, the more chance that our Premier League becomes just utterly commercialized. I'm not a huge fan of American sports. Mark does a pod with me, but I'm not a huge fan of it, because you're standing watching somebody about to take a field goal kick and a car flashes across trying to flog you a SUV or something like that. The thought of that happening on a corner or a Kieran Trippier free kick would just drive me insane, mate. What was your take on all of that noise from that game?
Yeah. I mean, I feel that. I mean, I totally. I don't get on with American sports and how it's done, and yeah, I think it's too intrinsic with sort of capitalism and stuff. I feel that though with the Premier League, I love the Premier League as it is. It's really, really good. I mean, did you watch the Chelsea Spurs game about 4 weeks ago? Such a good game.
End-to-end game. Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
And the drama and everything. And I think Jamie Carragher said, as a product, you can't get better than that. And I don't care if you watch, 4-3 Bundesliga, Munich versus Cologne or whatever. Like, that was just such a great game. And you don't want that to be ruptured or manipulated in any way. I get that. I feel what he said was he seems to be throwing his weight around a lot. And the North-South thing is just completely foreign to us. I would argue, however, he mentioned something about a pyramid and sort of money trickling down. And I would just argue, I would like to maybe find out, what does he mean by that? Is it an initiative in whereby sort of an exhibition game where these big but the players come together, they face off, and that money trickles down to the Championship and League One? I'd be for that if that's just a one-off game, but I don't know if it was more than that or what he meant by that precisely. So, yeah, I do agree in your principle. There's been enough meddling recently. There's so much tweaking all the time. They're obsessed with tweaking and meddling rules, and but also, I'm all in favour of money trickling down, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, Gary Neville was very vocal on it, and so was Jurgen Klopp, to be fair. So hopefully, we'll keep his crazy batshit ideas at bay, mate. So just moving on to the last section here. It's an interesting one to get your take on this, mate. We speak about it a little bit on the channel. We are not ITKs. We do little rumor shows, which is basically just things we picked up from articles that you do on the various websites that you write for and stuff like that, and the likes of yourself. But the ITK, the in the know kind of craze is it's a little bit like Gremlins, isn't it? That one gets wet and then it spawns another 60 of them online or something like that. And I'm just curious to get your take on it as somebody who does this for a living. Who finds sources and gets information and pieces together an article about maybe a player that we're linked to, or maybe somebody that we've inquired about. How do you find the ITK as a professional? Do you find them like quite funny? Do you think they're harmless, or do you find them quite a nuisance, and do you find them quite disruptive to the world of journalism, mate? How do you see them?
I feel that nowadays with the internet, you don't have to be a qualified journalist to go and use your incentive and find information and find transfer stories in particular. There's a NUFC account called The Muppeteers, and he's got 150,000 followers now, blue tick and everything. He's not affiliated with anyone. It's just him on YouTube, and he goes out and he from across the Atlantic as well. I know he works full time. I talk to him sometimes, and he's done tremendous work, obscenely good and reliable source of information for Manchester United. You don't need to be with the fucking Times or wherever to get this sort of information nowadays.
Yeah.
If you play your cards right, if you go about things in a certain way, and you are affable and you are persistent without being annoying, and you build relationships and trust, and you can progress and you can find information. The in your nose, I feel that I don't. I mean, they don't. I have been tied. There was one tweet you tied me in with them. It really frustrated me at one point. But I don't know whether it's they don't. I don't. People annoy me when they're malicious, and the in the nose, they're not malicious people. They don't seem malicious. They've never been horrible or anything like that. So I don't have anger towards them or anything like that. And it's just transfers into the day. They can, if they're saying untrustworthy information, they can dilute things, and they breed a sense of distrust to people who are putting in the effort, and that does irritate me a little bit. If you're breeding, you're selling false information. But if anything, it just sort of confuses me, because they'll say, for instance, there was, January. Kieran Trippier is having his medical at 2:00 tomorrow, and then 2:00 comes and that's not happened. It just doesn't happen. I don't know what if that was me, and I've been told that, I would never use that source again. I say, you've mugged me off so much, and I said, I don't understand why they go back to that same person if they're being told something. And also, that's why I feel it's important as well to have a degree of transparency in what you say. And I try and do this as well, without giving away sources, obviously, because anything I say or I hear comes from a certain area. I mean, a bit better now. I'm able to verify information from certain areas, and you can get more of a rounded thing. But every person that will tell you something has an agenda, and they want you to release that information for a certain reason. And if he was told that, Kieran Trippier had a medical, instead of writing maybe Trippier's medical happening tomorrow, 2:00, be there, be square. If you just went, I am hearing that Trippier could be having his medical at 2:00 tomorrow.
Yeah, it's planned.
It's truth. That's why I write, I hear. I hear that this is maybe happening. And you just, so I have nothing against them. And, I know there are bigger ones. I'm sure there is someone who's telling them information, and they love the club, and I'm sure they're passionate about it. But yeah, it can be frustrating. And I honestly don't know some of them, what the motivation is for sometimes, though. I really don't know. And what goes on, if they're just generally making stuff up, or I presume they're talking to someone, but they're talking to someone obviously who's just giving them the wrong information a lot of the time. So maybe they just, learn from it. And, just because if they've an anon account and they have like a NUFC or transfer man or something, that's their at, there's no reason why they can't get information that's better or worse than mine. Go for it. You don't have to be, as I say, with the Athletic to work, to grind and get these stories and information and stuff. I wouldn't disparage anyone just because of like their name or anything like that, or because they're not with a certain newspaper. But yeah, so I don't know. Again, I wouldn't say I get angry, because I only get angry over people being malicious of some sort, and it's a little bit annoying, but they're okay. Yeah, but I know as fans become enraged fans, misinformation a lot, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it can turn ugly, and it has turned ugly, I think. Twitter's a funny place. I mean, out of all the social media platforms, I probably prefer Twitter a bit more, because it's short, bite-sized chunks of this and that and that. Everyone's got their own preference. I don't like Instagram. I find it quite posery, and it's not my cup of tea. That's just a personal thing. I came off of it for that reason. But the problem with Twitter is Twitter's almost like a pub full of people who've had too many beers, and you can see as it goes on and on and on. And then they get to the point where they've had too many beers, and they start getting a bit nasty and a bit shitty. And most people will remove themselves from that situation at that particular moment in real life. But when it comes to Twitter, because they're hiding behind a screen or a phone or whatever, they just go and they go and they go. But on the ITK front, I mean, there is some guys who can be quite, antagonistic with it. That they get it wrong, but they're adamant that they're right and you're still wrong. Even when that player went and signed for West Ham or Leicester or something, they're still adamant that you're wrong. And I don't know whether they do it just to get likes and clickbait and all that kind of stuff. And I do think there's an element of that. These are just normal people, like myself, who have a day job. And then all of a sudden they go, I'll pretend that I know stuff, and I'll just throw enough mud at the wall and hope it sticks. And then if they get one or two of them right, they'll go, see, I told you. And then people start following them and liking them, and then they get blue ticks, and then they get their own podcasts and their YouTube channels. And all of a sudden, they almost become a personality just by guesswork, really. And then once you get to that stage, you might actually find some really good sources. But as you rightly say, I mean, there's a lad that does them, and I know him well. I've known him for a long time. He's a really, really nice guy. I've known him since we were younger, and he gets loads of shit online, and he keeps using these sources. They keep backfiring, really. And I keep wanting to say to him, just same as you said there, Jacque, just fucking bin the guy off. He's clearly giving you a load of bollocks.
Giving you the right information for sure, yeah.
Absolutely, but he keeps going, So, but yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. I don't get as wound up about it as a lot of people do, but weirdly enough, I think the Paqueta deal is a great example of how ITKs are now influencing the way fans feel about transfer rumours, because if you listen to Keith Downey, we were never in for Paqueta. I don't know what you heard at your end, but it was almost created out of this fantasy that ITKs had heard that his kids were going to school and picked out the school in Newcastle and all this noise. And it was never going to happen. But if that's the future of transfers, mate, I don't know what you think about it. It just seems like we'll constantly set ourselves up for disappointment and anger, won't we, if we believe these people too much.
It's I think with that, so I remember going and sort of asking, and they said no. And then it was like almost shocked, like, well, really? I think the Athletic reported there was a sort of, he was on their list or something in January of last year. And then it probably wasn't helped as well by Bruno and him coming over so openly to Newcastle, and Bruno on Instagram sort of saying, and then obviously, it got carried by the in the know. I mean, all I heard about him was that he was unhappy at Lyon because he came initially for Juninho, the free kick taker.
Yes. I remember that.
But they didn't get on, and then him in the club, so he left, and then Bruno and Paqueta were sort of remained there, and now he sort of looked for a way out. But who knows with West Ham though? It could happen. It could happen next year. No, I hope not. I was very happy when that saga was put to bed. Actually, I was very happy.
I was so sick of it.
Paqueta. It's like, oh, for God's sake, it's not happening, kind of thing. Everyone's saying it's not happening. But he did want to move. But yeah, it just wasn't happening, and now he's on to West Ham. But yeah, I was very happy when that one was put to bed. He seems like a really good player, and I think the fact he was Brazilian as well, the Brazilian contingency, would have been quite fun. But I think it was in the know, but it was also probably not helped by Bruno saying he was coming. On I think it was Instagram Live and stuff, or nodding. I think he nodded anyway. It's just playing around,
I think he's just one of them quirky characters, Bruno. He quite likes to have a laugh and everything, doesn't he? So I think he's probably just having a wind up. And
it's only a bit of fun, You shouldn't take him nodding doesn't mean anything. The club did for him. It's not to Bruno Guimaraes whether Newcastle paid 40 million for Paqueta.
He's probably just as surprised as we are when someone rings him and says, "Oh, we've just signed Isaac." He says, "Oh Christ, I didn't know we were even going to go for him." So
he's not Mbappe. He has no say. He's not Mbappe,
that's a whole podcast in its own to talk about Mbappe, mate. Good God, that is just that's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Just to kind of finish up, mate, do you think, again, with some of these ITK rumors, we don't know who the sources are, do you think there's a bit of mischief making from agents built in within this, and to you guys in the press as well, Jacque, where an agent might feed you a line that somebody's interested in my client, and it maybe draws other clubs out? Do you think there's a bit of that fishing going on still?
Could be. Never trust. Well, the worst ones are actually for football clubs. They're worse than agents, and that may surprise you. Football clubs are the most manipulative and most PR conscious out of all of them, which is really strange. Some worse than others. Could well be agents trying to push their name out there. Could well be. But also, sometimes agent generated stories aren't necessarily wrong. It's just that it could be the absolute truth. I'm not entirely sure, really. But certainly agents, a lot of buying and purchasing is PR heavy. I've mentioned before about, Pogba and stuff. And he was not an 80, 90 million pound player, but because of the sponsorship around him and the PR he had, they were able to sell him like that.
He was an Instagram signing. Really, it was probably the first Instagram signing. Really,
and he had his own emoji and stuff, and it was a whole thing. And so that's why, as well as being a good football player, it's very important for these players to be their name to be out there often and to be attached to big clubs. There was a player recently who's I saw. It was something ridiculous. It was like, it was a story about someone like Icardi or something like that. Oh, he's linked to Bayern Munich, Chelsea, PSG, Real Madrid, and Barcelona are after him. So obviously they're not after him. That's clearly an agent just trying to get his name out there and seem like he'd be associated with them sort of clubs, really. But yeah, I think it'd be pretty mental, in the nose if they're just making it up. I'm sure it does happen, but for me, I feel like it could be this dodgy agent or someone who's selling themselves as being more affiliated with the club than they actually are, and they're just sort of talking shite, really. And the other person doesn't want to end the relationship because they do enjoy getting this information. But yeah, they've just got to move on and try and find someone else. Get Stephen Nixon's number or something. That's the way to do it.
Absolutely, mate. We might try that ourselves and we'll become an ITK. We'll actually get it right. That's fantastic. Well, that's all the time we've got for an episode, mate. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting to hear perspective from obviously somebody like yourself who's involved in the media. We'll maybe try and get you back on when it comes to January transfer window time as well, mate, if you're up for that. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Chris. Really
absolutely. And as I mentioned at the start, guys, if you haven't already, please click that like and subscribe button. It really helps us grow as a channel. We love bringing you this content. It's all free. We don't charge anybody for anything, especially in these difficult times. So we like to bring you just Newcastle chat anytime you want, free of charge, live shows and pre-recorded videos like this. So from me and Jacque, we're saying, see you later. Let's keep supporting that team of Core United, and we'll catch you next time and evermore.
See ya.
Bye.